Okay, so welcome to our live stream Q&A event. Folks may be joining us in the next few minutes. Usually they start trickling in, but I'm just going to dive right in, just in the interest of time and making sure that we address as many questions as we possibly can in the time that we have. And let's see, I just want to make sure that we've got our recording going. Yes, we do. Great. All right. So for those of you that have not attended a live stream before, twice a month we come together and answer some questions from my online students from the different courses that I offer. And the idea is that for those that are able to submit their questions in advance, the Google Doc for that is available inside your student dashboard. Additionally, I usually create pauses and spaces of rest during these live sessions so that I can answer questions for those of you that are here in real time. So I am just going to dive right in by addressing some questions that were offered in advance, and then I will take pauses as people join us and ask questions. And please feel free to type your questions in the chat, and I will acknowledge those throughout our discussion here today. So thank you for being here. All right, so we had a lot of questions about avoidant attachment this month. And I'm going to try to keep my questions fairly concise. If you want more elaboration, again, please feel free to type your comments and questions in the chat. So the first question we had, how do avoidant partners feel connected, or how do they connect? Okay. So individuals that lean towards avoidance or have avoidant attachment style tend to value a sense of personal autonomy and their own independence, right? So they tend to feel connected when that need for personal space and autonomy is respected. They are comfortable with casual conversations, shared activities, and what we might call a type of parallel play. So this is when you're able to do activities together and or separately. You don't necessarily have to be engaging with one another, but you're sort of together doing things in the same space. They also appreciate things like consistent and non-intrusive communication, and that allows them to build trust over time. Then they're also feel connected through things like actions that support show that you are supportive and reliable. Usually how you behave is more effective than verbal communications, right? So these are the type of folks that think actions speak louder than words. Okay, so they're much more attentive to what you do as opposed to what you say. They also feel safe when they are not pressured to express deep emotions, which sometimes, ironically, inspires them to spontaneously open up. They often connect through things like shared interests. They tend to like predictable routines. So if you can participate with them in their routines, that can feel connecting. And they usually are very drawn to intellectual or conceptual kind of conversation. These are for our avoidant partners that have more head energy, right? They kind of use that intellect sometimes to think about their feelings rather than feel them, but they can still be stimulated by that kind of discourse. Usually they're also drawn to things like subtle or nonverbal gestures of affection. Could be just a gentle touch or smile, something that is meaningful in that way, but not overwhelming for them. If you can demonstrate things like consistency and reliability, that your words match up with what you say and do, then that can also allow them to feel more secure. Additionally, if you're able to provide practical support when they may be having a difficult time and being there for them without making it about yourself, meaning they're going through a hard time, and so you feel disconnected from them, and so you feel this, you now worry that they're disconnecting from you because they're going through a hard time, and the support you're offering is really about getting reassurance from them. They're going to sense that and pull away even more. So if you are showing up during a difficult time for them, showing up in the ways that they need that support them, not about reassuring yourself as they go through a difficult time, right? So those are some ways that in which avoidant partners can start to feel connected or demonstrate their connection. We had another question. If an avoidant partner is not keeping their word when they start to date someone, what does that mean? Okay. So, I mean, this is true for anyone that is saying one thing and doing another, or saying they will do something and then they don't do it, not just partners that are avoidant, but let's say we have a partner that has a more avoidant attachment style, and maybe they make some big promises in the beginning and then they don't really keep their word on those promises. It can indicate many underlying issues, but I'm just going to name a couple of them here. So there are some potential reasons that there might be an incongruency about what they say and what they do. So number one, there can be a fear of intimacy. Okay. So avoidant partners are usually afraid of getting too close too quickly. And so if they start breaking promises, for example, it can be a subconscious way to try to create distance and maintain some emotional control over their personal space, right? And how fast things are going. Secondly, they may have genuine ambivalence about how close you're getting. So the inconsistency can reflect their inner struggle with balancing that desire for connection and then knowing that they have this need for more space or independence or autonomy. They may also be testing your boundaries. Okay, so it might be that they're using this as a way to gauge how you handle things like disappointment or unmet expectations in a relationship. So it's some form of a test, testing your boundaries, testing how you respond to things. It could also indicate a lack of priority, meaning that they don't as yet prioritize the relationship that highly. And so they're still kind of assessing their own interest level and the compatibility of the relationship. So in this case, you want to express how their inconsistency, affects you, and then set clear boundaries and standards around that. And then just observe if they have a willingness to improve, or if they have a willingness to, generously contribute to and be part of a reciprocal exchange. If that pattern continues, or there's a resistance or a defensiveness against being a contributor to your well-being and experience, and they don't make any efforts to improve upon that, then there may actually be deeper compatibility issues that need to be addressed. And you may want to reevaluate if this is something you want to pursue much more deeply. Great question. Okay. Another question. What if my dismissive avoidant partner seems cold and non-responsive after we appeared to repair an argument? What is going on there? Okay. So even after you have resolved an argument, the stress and the emotional intensity can linger, especially for someone that has dismissive avoidant attachment style. And so they may need more time to process the exchange in order to return to what might be their usual state or emotional equilibrium. In other words, their distance could be a way to regain a sense of control and stability in the context of the relationship. So they're trying to internally regulate after going through a period of exerting some effort to co-regulate, right? They may also be afraid that opening up again could lead to further conflict or arguments or emotional discomfort. And so there can be kind of lingering unresolved feelings or concerns from the argument that really were not fully addressed or expressed. Sometimes they can be a little bit placating, or they can say yes to things that they don't really want to say yes to because they just want to get the argument over with, right? They just want things to go back to some kind of even keel because it's uncomfortable. So you might try acknowledging that the argument could still be on their mind and ask if there's anything that they want to discuss or share about it. You just want to make sure that you pre-frame these statements by, reassuring them, I'm not going to criticize you. I'm not going to jump on top of you. I'm not going to take it personally, right? I just really want to know the truth of what you're experiencing. Now, if this is a recurring pattern, then I would recommend seeking some kind of therapist or counselor to kind of especially one that specializes in attachment issues, to sort of function as a buffer or mediator, because sometimes that third person in the room creates a safety net for them to feel like they can open up. And also, of course, someone who's a trained professional can help you create some strategies in the context of the relationship to give you some tools and skill building to navigate conflicts more effectively. If you're looking for more content around this and you haven't purchased it yet, my Courageous Communicator program offers a lot along those lines. I'll include a link to that in the caption of this video in the replay. Okay, what else? Should I block my fearful avoidant partner because I want to end a painful cycle, but I know it will hurt them, so I don't know if I should? Okay. So in this case, when we set clear boundaries, you communicate your limits and what are your standards in relationships, right? And so each person really has a right to their feelings, whether they are comfortable feelings or uncomfortable feelings. And so allowing your partner to experience their emotions uncensored, meaning whether they are comfortable or uncomfortable feelings, even if it's painful, is part of respecting that person's autonomy, right? It also means that we need to acknowledge and validate our own feelings without guilt. So I feel guilty because they feel bad. So there's some level of that which inspires empathy and allows us to do things like repair in a conflict. But when that guilt becomes so all-consuming that you disown yourself to accommodate someone else's difficult feelings, then that's self-abandonment and it's a lack of boundaries, right? And that's going to repeat the cycle it sounds like you're trying to end. So you can show up as a loving contributor to somebody else's well-being and emotional experiences by, fostering things like an environment of mutual respect and understanding. Of course, we can do that, right? But sometimes when a relationship becomes dysfunctional or there's these toxic dynamics start evolving and you realize that boundaries are not being respected, then prioritizing your well-being is not selfish, right? It's not selfish. It's self-advocacy, okay? It's self-preservation. And now and when that is the case, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let them go, right? And allowing your partner to go through their dark night of the soul can be a catalyst for their personal growth and their healing. And it can be an act of love to let someone go through their struggles so that they can learn how to foster resilience and even have their own experience of self-discovery. Okay. It gives both of you a chance to work through your issues without what could be the crutch of a relationship that actually keeps triggering, enabling, and unhealthy patterns. Now, that doesn't mean that this person should be without support, right? There's many options and resources for people to find support out there. But in this situation, it's important to also recognize your role. And if you are a part of the cycle that just keeps going around and around and around and around, then it's likely you are not the appropriate person to be that support, right? That's not your role right now. So in that case, it is time to draw a line, and that's going to be to the benefit of both of you. Okay. Okay, these are great questions. Thank you, Bezam. Yes, so that's the link we have. So what does an avoidant partner mean when they say that they don't have the energy to date with intention? Okay. Interesting question. All right. So when an avoidant partner says that they don't have the energy to date with intention, they are expressing let's say, a significant inner conflict around personal boundaries, right? And what it means to have a shared emotional experience or even inhabit a shared emotional space. So for them, maintaining emotional boundaries in a relationship may require more energy than they currently feel like they have, right? Because what are emotions? Emotions are energy moving through the body. And so this constriction of energy can stem from past experiences or even some kind of current stress that they're going through. And I believe this indicates there's some level of unresolved inner conflict going on. And so this is their way of acknowledging that they're not ready or they are not willing to confront whatever the challenges they might face in engaging in a committed relationship at this time might be. And so they're kind of struggling to manage their own inner emotional well-being and personal balance. Okay. So when we push someone to engage beyond what they have articulated is their current capacity, then especially when it comes to avoidant attachment, that can lead to further withdrawal and more emotional distancing or isolation. So in this case, I recommend that you might approach the situation empathically, right? And just listening to what they are telling you. But if you want to date someone who's interested in dating intentionally, this is not the person to do it with. Okay. Because remember, there's stages of change, you know, and this is true for any attachment style: secure, anxious, disorganized, or fearful avoidant, or dismissive avoidant. You know, every person under the sun, when they are confronted with an opportunity for change, there's stages of changes that we go through. So there is the sort of pre-contemplative stage where there's not a lot of awareness around a problem. And so we're just kind of mired in it. I call this the wandering phase, but we're just sort of wandering around. We're just responding to things, reacting to things. You know, in this phase, typically there's a lot of repetitive cycles going on, patterns going on. You tend to struggle with learning lessons because there's not a lot of awareness and you're not really asking questions. You don't really think about, why do I feel this way? Only that you feel that way, and you want to feel justified in responding, as opposed to slowing down and taking intentional and considered action, right? So I call that kind of like the wandering phase. We're a little bit like ping pongs when we're in this phase. And then there's the exploring phase. So usually after we've been in the wandering phase long enough, we've experienced enough repeated patterns and pain and heartbreak, we reach a place where we're like, God, I really just don't want to experience this anymore. And what's going on? And no matter what, like, I am somehow the common denominator here. So what is my contribution to this, right? How are my choices leading to this repeated cycles in my life? So now we're in the exploring phase because there is intention there. We are exploring, we're not wandering. Now we're exploring, we're looking, right? And we are attending to things in a much more focused and intentional way. So in the exploring phase, now we have this need for answers. We're actually able to ask the questions, right? And so now there's this search for answers. And a lot of times this is when people look up a YouTube video, or they pick up a self-help book, or they look up their insurance and see what their coverage is for mental health and behavioral health services, right? So there's a level of, so now we're beyond like pre-contemplation, and now we're in contemplation, moving into preparatory actions, right? So we know something needs to change, and we're taking some actions towards that change, maybe even just making plans to take actions toward that change, right? So this is in what I call the exploring phase. So we start gathering things to try to meet the demands of that pain that we've experienced, so that we have more awareness, so that perhaps we can circumvent that pain in the future, or at least make sense of it. And as we start making sense of it, that moves us into what I consider to be the discovering phase. So now we've gathered some evidence, we've made some plans, and in the discovering phase, we've taken action on those plans. We're seeing the therapist, we're reading the books, we're following a YouTube channel. We are perhaps going to workshops, and we're meeting other people now who are asking similar questions. And so I feel like in this phase, it kind of goes beyond just, you know, why is this happening to me, or what is happening to me? Now it's more like we go from what to why, right? So what is happening to me? Why is it happening to me in the greater scheme of my life, right? So now we're kind of taking a step back, and we're looking at, what meaning does this have for my life? And I like to think of it as my spiritual curriculum, right? How does this contribute to what I want to get out of my quality of life and experience and relationships? So to my mind, this is really more of a growth, a spiritual growth phase. You know, this is when we move from sort of ping-ponging around without intention to, in the exploring phase, we're much more intentional now. And then in the discovering phase, we're kind of led by a search for meaning, right? And that usually lends itself to, what is the spiritual meaning here? And then, in the exploring and discovering phases, this is when people are taking action, they're making plans, they're acting on those plans, And then I believe the loving phase comes next. And this is when we are taking all that we have learned and we are taking all the skills that we've acquired, and now we are applying them in real life situations. So in the context of relationship, this is usually either that we're ready to try dating again if we're single, or we're ready to date in a different and much more intentional way, discerning way. If you're partnered, then it may be that there is like a resurgence in the relationship, or there's an enlivening of the relationship, wanting to approach your partner in a very different way. And if but you may be on a journey of personal growth and development, in which case now you're applying these skills to loving yourself in a very different and much more intentional way, right? That I've had clients for whom this really looks more like maybe they just got out of, a 2-decade-long marriage and they don't know who they are anymore outside of a relationship. And so now as they enter the loving phase, they're figuring out who they are again, and they're applying all that they learned to exploring the world and the varieties of life with an attitude of enjoyment and curiosity and experimentation, right? So these are sort of like what I consider to be the phases of development that we tend to go through, or you might call them stages of change. To bring it back to the original question, what about someone who says they're not ready to date intentionally? Then they're sort of in that wandering phase still. They're not exploring, they're not discovering, and they're not loving, right? In the sense that they're pre-contemplative. They're not even taking any kind of preparatory action towards change. Now, as I said before, it doesn't matter what attachment style you have. You're also going to exist somewhere on that spectrum for readiness for change, right? So whatever attachment style you have, if you're not in a readying phase, then you're basically talking to a wall, and you can't really force someone to be ready until they're ready, right? Sometimes partners can catalyze us, but I tend to believe that those partners show up because we're already ready, right? In which case, that person who's refusing to change is your catalyst, because in butting up against their refusal, you realize, I really want to. And so now you are catalyzed into a period of growth, right? So I hope that helps answer that question. Just want to acknowledge everyone here in the group. Thank you for joining. And I also, I just want to create pauses. If there's any questions for those of you that are here live, please feel free to type them in the chat as they're coming up, or thoughts that you have as we're just going through these. I do want to create moments of rest to make sure that I'm addressing the questions for those of you that are here. And I so appreciate you joining me live. Okay. This was okay. So this one, another one that was submitted in advance. This one comes up a lot. What is the best way to introduce the idea to someone that they might be avoidant? So how do you tell them about this? So this can be a little bit tricky. It can be a bit of a delicate endeavor. So I usually recommend that you start by sharing your own experience, right? Your own sort of insights into attachment styles as a way to normalize that discussion, right? And maybe you talk about all the attachment styles together and kind of explain what each one means in a neutral sort of conceptual way, right? So, I learned about these attachment styles, and this is what they mean, and this is what they look like. And then you might say something like, these stood out to me because I thought I saw some of our relationship dynamics in these videos, articles, blogs, whatever, that I read or that I watched. And I'm just curious what you think. And I would not offer your evaluation to them. I would not tell them what you think their attachment style is, right? Instead, I would just leave it as an open invitation to explore the topic together. Maybe to share the articles or the videos that you watched, or maybe a little quiz or an assessment that you took online, and to just keep it open, to be patient, right? And to allow them to kind of digest it in their own way, and giving them an opportunity to respond, right? You really want them to come to their own conclusions. And you want to listen to what they say, because how they interpret this information and the way that they see themselves in the context of this framework, that is far more important information for you than trying to get them to see it your way, right? Knowing how they see and perceive things and perceive themselves in this context gives you a hell of a lot more information, right? And that's information you want. So you want to treat it like you're extending an invitation for growth, as opposed to here's a box that I want to try to squeeze you and me into, right? And squeeze you, me, and our relationship into. So that's how I recommend sharing those things. And I do have a video on my YouTube channel. It's called Attachment Styles, a Basic Overview. Typically, I recommend that for folks that ask me this question, just send them this video. It's a simple, basic overview of all the attachment styles. Just be like, hey, what did you think of that video? It really caught my attention and I'm interested to see what you think, right? I would keep it nice and open and see where the conversation goes. And I hope that's helpful. And I might even ask those of you here, how have you ever approached that? Have you ever tried to share the topic of attachment styles with a partner or potential partner, and how did you broach the subject? Whether you're watching it here live with me now or on the replay, I'd love to know that. Okay. This is another one which I thought was a pretty good question, because the issue of trauma is a really important one because it often informs how our attachment styles evolve, right? That's the environmental factors, the social conditioning that goes into how our nervous system and limbic brain, and in combination with our temperament, right, and our epigenetic expression, determines the safest way to establish proximity to attachment figures. So this question, what if your partner's avoidance is due to PTSD? If that's the case, will it always be an issue? So when a partner's avoidance is due to something like PTSD, then it can add an additional layer of complexity to their attachment style and their relationship dynamics, right? This is sort of, we might consider this to be like an organic factor in diagnosis that kind of comes before what we might evaluate as an attachment style. So PTSD can significantly impact our capacity for emotional regulation, and then therefore how we present in terms of our attachment inclinations, right, or behaviors. So avoidance in this context is often a coping mechanism to deal with overwhelming stress and severe trauma-related symptoms. So in this case, therapy is highly, highly, highly recommended. It can provide tools and strategies to manage symptoms, right, and improve our capacity for emotional regulation. There have been some powerful evidence-based studies that give statistically significant results for approaches such as somatic experiencing, accelerated resolution therapy, EMDR, brain spotting, which evolved from EMDR, of course, creative arts therapies, which is my specialty, and also altered states in treatment. So things like ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, or MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, things like that. And so understanding what your partner is going through in this case can really help you provide that support and help them navigate challenges more effectively. But it's also really crucial to ensure that you have resources and support, right? Who's going to care for the caretaker? So you want to make sure that you have a lot of resources and support. It's going to take a community, really. And also healing from things like PTSD is a long-term process, right? So progress might feel like it's kind of gradual, and there may be some ups and downs along the way, but I do not believe that it's a permanent barrier to having a healthy relationship, right? That as long as you can be working with these things in intentional ways, the brain can and does heal itself. So I hope that that's helpful. Let's see. But if they are in a non-positive environment, will it impact them further, like if they are at work? Tell me more about what you mean by that, Alexandra. If you can give me a little more specifics on what you mean by that. I mean, just generally speaking, of course, human beings are products of our environment, but inner and outer environments, right? So you can learn all the tips and tricks in the world to internally emotionally regulate, But if you're swimming in poison, learning to deep breathe is only going to help you so far. Eventually, you're going to be deep breathing that poison, right? So learning to be organized internally is also about developing a strong internal landscape so that you make better choices about how you're going to curate your environments, right? So being what I like to call self-sovereign is also about making good choices about who and what you surround yourself with. So it's twofold in that sense, right? When your partner has trauma, how do you navigate that in a loving way without triggering them? So I have a video on my YouTube channel. It's called Healing Fearful Avoidance in One Breath. And it basically, I mean, that video, I highlight fearful avoidance because that was the attachment style the person asked about, but it's really applicable to anyone in any situation. I also have another video called Mastering Your Emotions and Mastering Triggered Emotions. But basically, how do you navigate someone else's trauma without triggering them? By being really good at your own auto regulation, right? By being a really good manager of your own triggers. And then also, you cannot control, it's important to realize that you can't control every trigger someone else is going to have, because they have an internal mechanism, let's say, of interpreting incoming information and stimuli. So oftentimes, if someone's experienced trauma, they have a habit of jumping to a disproportionate response because their survival system is hyperactivated, right? Or to incorrectly, negatively skewed interpretation of what's going on. So you can do as much as you can do, which is work as hard as you can on your own emotional regulation. And then that's sort of like showing up with 100% of your good intentions and with all the skill building that you have acquired. But then they are still required, but it's still only 50% of what's required to make the relationship work, right? Or support the relationship, create a safe space. The other 50% is the work they have to do to question their assumptions, to recognize their own triggered response and ask, check it against reality, then implement the tools that they are learning, right? So in that video, I said healing fearful avoidance in one breath. I walk you through like 7 steps. So basically, you're taking one pause, and what happens in that pause, right? So my answer in a nutshell is get really good at managing your own triggers, and then get really good at discerning where the line is between where you can show up and what is their responsibility to accomplish in processing their own energy, right? And then making sure that you're drawing lines around what is mine to assist, what is mine to assist in creating a safe space, and then that's their job, right? To show up in that way. And I cannot be responsible for all the feelings that they have, right? I can be a willing contributor. I can be a generous contributor to someone's emotional well-being. I can ask questions about how I can show up to be supportive to them. And then they have to inform me of what would help them. And then they have to allow that help in, right? I asked him, are you willing to work on your avoidant attachment as I work on my anxious attachment? He said, I'm talking about it with you, right? I'm here in the relationship with you. So yes. Oh, thank you for sharing that. So basically he's saying, look at my actions. And so, I guess I would say give it as much time as you're willing to give it, and make sure that his actions are matching up with his words, right? Okay, great questions. What else do we have here? How to create strong boundaries. Oof, okay. Okay, so creating strong boundaries that's something we talk a lot about in in my Attachment 101 courses. So in the Attachment 101 courses, lesson 2 is all about boundaries. Actually, I mean, we touch upon boundaries in probably 3 lessons in our Attachment 101 courses. Lesson 2, I think we tackle it again in lessons 4 and 5 in different ways. But, you know, when we're thinking about boundaries, we're really thinking about how am I organizing the way that I ask for what well, first, recognizing what I need, noticing what contributes to that need being fulfilled or unfulfilled, drawing lines around that. And then how am I negotiating the degrees of emotional influence that exist between 2 and more people, right? So, and then how is that being expressed energetically, not just verbally, but energetically as well. So the most basic way that I can offer to explore this is you want to acknowledge that your needs and your feelings are important, first of all, right? And everyone deserves to have their inner emotional as well as their outer and physical personal space respected, right? And their limits respected. So first off, we just need to adopt that attitude of respect for ourselves and for others, right? Then the first thing you want to do is figure out what you don't like. And usually that's the first thing that we become aware of because we get a strong jolt of, you know, discomfort or anxiety. So, oh, I didn't like that, which must mean that I do like, right? Which is the second step, which must mean I do like or I do want. Because why? Because it makes me feel what? How does that make you feel? Okay. And then you want to get really specific on why it makes you feel that way. And then, so that's number 4, get really specific on what makes you feel that way. And then number 5, of course, is just to put it all together into what I call red or green flag statements. So if we were to put this all together, it might sound like, well, I don't like it when, you know, so-and-so doesn't respond to me within 24 hours, but I do like it when they initiate contact with me and respond within at least 6 hours, right? Because that makes me feel loved, considered, and respected, which must mean that I need responsiveness, respect, and consideration in relationships, right? And I know that I am respected, connected, and considered when someone responds within 4 hours, repeats back to me what I say, makes plans 2 out of 3 days a week, right? We get really specific with that. And then I will honor this knowledge and understanding of what I really need and want by no longer entertaining people who don't respond within 24 hours, people who don't engage in a conversation where they are mirroring back to me what I say, or don't deepen the conversation by offering more of their own thoughts, inclinations, and feelings, right? Who dismiss my thoughts and feelings, i.e. disrespect me, right? Or ignore when I say I need and want something. And so I will no longer entertain those people. And instead, I will choose to, in essence, pay more attention to people who do those things, right? So this is how we really get into the nitty-gritty of establishing our boundaries in a practical way. I do have, for those of you that have the Attachment 101 courses, this is really lessons 2, I believe it's 4 and 5. But I also have a downloadable PDF that does this in sort of Cliff Note fashion. So Bezam, I think that we can, if you could make a note, we will share the link to the Boundaries Guidebook in the replay of this video when we post it, and you can check that out. All right, just want to acknowledge our... Okay, so another question. How can I help my avoidant partner to feel enough in the relationship and also just feeling that he can provide for me and our baby? He is not feeling enough for me and our baby. So this kind of goes back to what I said before. You can't control somebody else's feelings. You can be a generous contributor to those feelings. You can care about someone's feelings, but you cannot control them. So you show up with 100% of your good intentions. You communicate with soft strategies, which is expressing appreciation for what they do offer, acknowledging their autonomy, and opening up your communications to invite co-creative solutions, right? But if someone says, oh, I'm not enough for you and your baby, that's an uphill climb. That's an uphill climb. And having been, I got married last week, but having been a single mom myself, someone who doesn't feel like they're enough and they're attracted to you as a single mother, you don't want to be their mom. And in some ways, they're kind of asking you to be that and to validate them and to fluff them up and to fill up that hole for them. Don't do it. Don't do it, honey. I'm sorry. Do not do it. No, you don't need a second child. You want a man who comes in and says, I want to take care of you. You don't need to validate my self-esteem, right? So let it go. What do you feel would be the middle ground between being a dismissive avoidance, own personal Jesus therapist? I don't know what that means. And not giving up on them as I see them pleading in the comments and interviews. I just saw your short today where you say, don't be their therapist. Yeah, so I would just repeat that. Don't be their therapist. Don't do it. Do not do it. They are sucking you into projected paradigm and they are not ready for change. Don't do it. If you understand your avoidant partner needs time to calm themselves and you as the other partner understand that, how much time is enough time to bring the conversation again to solve the issue? So that is a negotiation between what they need and what you need, right? So I would just ask, we don't need to figure this out or strategize it here on the call without that person involved. Just ask them, how much time do you feel you need to regulate yourself, to digest what we've discussed and come back to the conversation with some decided ideas and solutions, right? What do they say? And, oh, well, I don't know. Okay, well, I can say from my perspective, this is something that I can give X amount of time, but for me to be in a equal partnership, I need to know that you can come back and walk through this with me here today. And I'm wide open to whatever your solutions might be. And I want to know what your ideas might be. So I'm going to reach out again in X amount of time. And at that time, let's connect and see where we're at, right? Like, I'm not the type of person who waits for someone else to set the tone. I let people know like what my standards are for a relationship and the kind of reciprocation and communication that I need. And they have the option, of course, to opt into it or not. Right. And there's plenty of wide open space and invitation for someone to show up and to contribute to that and how it evolves. But I wouldn't, kind of figure it out without them. I would involve them in figuring out what that is. And if they're sort of unwilling or refuse to or won't contribute to determining what that is for them, you're going to be spending so much of your time in your own head trying to figure them out. Not worth your time. Okay. My fearful avoidant partner has left after almost 4 years with threats to leave on and off. He was firm that he won't come back. I wonder, what are your thoughts and if he'll come back? I mean, do you want them to? Off and on for 4 years? Aren't you tired? Aren't you exhausted? Right? Like, what are you getting out of this? And also, the other thing I would say is this is a ripe opportunity to be asking yourself really important questions. So what are you actually ready for? If you are with someone and committing a lot of time, energy, and effort to someone who's clearly not ready, inconsistent, making threats to leave, leaving, coming back. So what is that? That is someone with whom A, you can't really feel safe or settle in with, which means B, the level of intimacy that you can accomplish is either inconsistent, which creates a pattern of intermittent reinforcement, which is going to turn on your adrenaline, your stress hormones, and your bonding hormones all together, which creates an addictive pattern in your brain, which is very hard to break, right? And also unhealthy for your body and your system, which is also pretty much bars you from feeling a sense of ease in the relationship, which is what we might define as secure attachment with healthy co- and auto-regulation going on, right? But when we continue to engage with someone who has those patterns, what are we, and we're not able to get past a certain level of intimacy and engagement because of that. What part of you remains safe in that pattern? What part of you remains unexposed? What part of you is not challenged to go deeper? Right? So that's really where I think the lessons in these relationships lie. So by continuing to wait around and think about and hope for someone who doesn't look too closely at me, who can't commit and be stable, what part of me is able to hide out, right? What, by choosing someone who rejects me repeatedly, how am I repeatedly rejecting a part of myself? So that's something that I would probably leave you with. Personal Jesus is hinting as a song that every time someone calls on you, you should answer the call. It's to do with unconditional love. That's not unconditional love. That is enmeshment trauma, right? So there's this big confusion, I think, with folks that have insecure attachment, that unconditional love means that you're with somebody no matter what, no matter who they are, no matter what. But that's not true. That's enmeshment. Unconditional love has to include you in it. And if you are always responding to someone just because they call, or you are making yourself into what someone else needs just because they need it, it is inevitably going to require that you abandon some part of yourself. So that's not love anymore, because you're not there anymore. Where'd you go? Where'd you go? You're not even there to love them anymore. So that's enmeshment. Okay. Sometimes unconditional love would mean that you don't respond, because that's what they really need in order to be catalyzed into whatever their next phase of growth and expansion might be. That's unconditional love. Unconditional love is I see and understand and respond to the divine spark in you, even if your ego doesn't, even if your insecurities don't, even if the inner child in you believes it's not capable, or it's too scared, or it's too afraid. I see the divine spark and spirit that exists in you, and I trust your own capacity to heal. And I trust the strength that you have and the power that exists within you beneath all of that. And so I'm going to respond to that. And that means that I also need to honor my own spirit and my own divine spark and my own curriculum for being here, knowing and trusting that I am here to experience the varieties of life and to make choices about what does and does not align with my soul, heart, soul curriculum. And sometimes that means saying no. And saying no is a part of expanding into a more, a greater state of being, right? A more connected state of being. We are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And by virtue of that, we need to make yes and no decisions. We need to be discerning. We need to include ourselves in that conversation. That is unconditional love. What to do if the avoidant does not acknowledge a mistake they did that led to broken trust? Do I give them a second chance, or am I risking too much? Especially they want to go slow and not commit. So there's a difference between going slow and not committing, first of all. They don't want to acknowledge a mistake that they did that led to broken trust. Okay. So I'll drop my thing. Okay. So when we are resisting acknowledging something that we did that led to a negative impact on someone else, usually there's a shame wound there. And we don't want to acknowledge it because we don't want to feel shameful, right? But in a relationship, until there is acknowledgement, especially of broken trust, you will never be able to build that trust. And you know, people don't necessarily have to agree with you, but they do have to empathize with, maybe I don't feel the same way about that thing, but I do want to know what it's like to feel that way about something that's important to me. And your well-being is important to me, and establishing trust in this relationship is important to me. And so I want to acknowledge the impact that my behavior had on you, because it matters to me. And while I'm not taking on full responsibility for your feeling good or bad, I do want to be a contributor to your good feelings. I do want to be generously contribute to you feeling considered and you feeling like your feelings matter to me, whether or not I'm taking on full responsibility for them. Because why else would you want to be in a relationship? That's the joy of being in a relationship, right? You can depend on someone. If they're unwilling to acknowledge the impact of their behavior such that it broke your trust, no, I mean, you can't really get beyond that. Can't really get beyond that, honestly, right? Hope that helps. What is the sweet spot? Not ignoring your needs, but not giving up on the avoidant, letting them know you're studying their ailment. Not sure what you mean by that. I go back to what I said in the beginning of this, letting them know you're studying their ailment. I would go back to the question that was posed at the beginning of this recording when we talked about how do you invite an avoidant partner to learn about their own attachment style, right? You open it up like an invitation for growth and you share materials in a neutral way and you ask them to evaluate the information that you have gathered for themselves and come to their own conclusions. And whatever conclusions they come to is going to be the most important information that you could ever acquire, not getting them to see what you see, right? It's not about giving up or not giving up on someone, right? It is about evaluating what is the compatibility here. What is the willingness for change? What is the willingness for growth? It's not about giving up on someone. If someone is not compatible or they're unwilling to change and they're not interested in growth, you're not giving up on them. You're acknowledging their level of readiness. You're evaluating what page they're on with respect to readiness for change. So by letting them go, you're not giving up on them. You are accepting what is and allowing them to be where they are in their stage of readiness. So you're loving them in an unconditional way, as we're defining it here, right? I hope that helps. Okay. The emotional labor for an avoidant relationship seems imbalanced. Can you suggest some coping mechanisms? Okay. So when you find yourself in a relationship with an avoidant partner and you feel that the emotional labor is imbalanced, it's really crucial to reflect on why you might be willing to accept an imbalanced dynamic for yourself, right? So relationships are not supposed to be work. They are a refuge from work, and they do require effort, but it's an effort that ultimately deepens the connection and is intended to uplift you both, right? So instead of finding ways to tolerate the intolerable by trying to cope better, you want to consider if you yourself are repeating patterns from perhaps your early attachment experiences, right? Do you believe things like that you deserve a balanced relationship? Do you believe a reciprocal relationship is even possible? Can you identify any limiting beliefs that might be causing you to settle for less than what you want, such as I have to work hard for love, or I'm not worthy of a partner that meets my needs? So you really want to consider what are the hidden rewards of always being the one initiating emotional support or emotional connections. And does that make you feel, for example, oftentimes it makes us feel needed, right? Or if it makes it, on some level, it makes us feel more in control. I need to be needed, and that's how I know I'm loved. But if someone didn't need you, they didn't need you to be doing all that emotional labor, why would they love you? Why would they love you? I think once you answer that question, you won't be worried so much about this question, right? You want to understand that you deserve a partnership where the emotional labor is, at least over time, equally balanced. And look for relationships where there is that mutual respect and reciprocity, because that's really the foundation for having a more fulfilling partnership, right? Okay. So what about when you have synchronicities? So this is just the law of attraction at work, right? Oftentimes when we have anxious and avoidant partners, it's because they are two ends of the same stick, right? There is the same wound, And you just chose different ways of coping with it. And so when we experience all these synchronicities, it's just the universe responding to your energetic vibe, let's say, to your frequency. There's no deeper meaning except to show you how powerful you are, right? Oh, so it's mirroring back to me what I'm vibing at. So there's something, whatever I'm admiring or feeling drawn to or attracted to in my partner, it's a feeling I have when I'm with them. And a feeling is energy moving through my body. So what is it about this person that gives me greater access to me, gives me greater access to more of those good feelings that I have and that I create and that I generate and that I feel? What is the nuanced quality of energy that my spirit is asking for? So it called in such a partner because I am at a stage of readiness to acknowledge that I want to embrace more of that for myself in this lifetime. This is why I think these I call these cosmic relationships, because they usually are connected directly to the root, and they're about showing you what access to your own life force energy is being pinched off, and how now you can recognize all the ideas that it's from them, it's not from me, where you can let go of that so you can sweep out those dusty corners and start welcoming in the massive flow of energy we are requesting when we have this kind of enlivenment, this spark, these synchronicities that come into our experience with these relationships. It's just intended to wake you up, right? Yeah. And the bond might be romantic. It may not be. If it's cosmic relationship, it's usually romantic and sexual. It could be above that. There's twin flame relationships and whatnot, which again could be sexual, but don't have to be. Generally speaking, soulmate relationships altogether, just the umbrella of soulmate relationships, and even including karmic relationships, are intended to connect you to your own soul. So anyone that comes in that enlivens us in this way, typically they are holding up a mirror to show us where we're pinching ourselves off from a transcendent kind of love. And we're associating it with a narrow focus on love having to be delivered in a very specific way. And we're attached to the idea that it has to be delivered in that specific way. And so when we encounter relationships that shake us up in this way, it's because your soul is asking for a next, I believe, is ready for and is asking for a next level expansion and up leveling by showing you in my butting up against them what thoughts, feelings, limiting beliefs, constrictions, restrictions, obstacles are coming up, and how am I contributing to them, and how can I shift and change and integrate and install new thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and perspectives so that I can make room for more of me, right? I can relax into my own unfolding in a different way. What is the best quick tip to give your avoidant partner that knows they are avoidant, other than a therapist, a book, or videos like this? I mean, I'm not texted to them. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Usually let's see. Yeah. I'm anxious. My girlfriend is anxious avoidant. Okay, so anxious avoidant is another way of saying disorganized or fearful avoidant, unless you're talking about anxious ambivalent, which is a little bit different. She's doing trauma therapy now, and since contact broke up for months now, we decided to meet every 2 weeks. Will this help to make her more consistent? I mean, it sounds like she's doing the work. You can decide for yourself what you want out of a relationship in general. And if you feel like enough of that might be met in this relationship and you're willing to give it time, decide how much time you're willing to give it. And then go from there. I think it's less about them now, and it's more about you deciding what are your needs, what are your boundaries around those needs, what standards are you going to set, and how long are you going to give that process, right? And then you have to honor that. Because otherwise we slip into allowing someone else to set the tone. And when that happens, now we're no longer no longer discerning. We're no longer looking at compatibility. We're no longer honoring what it is we really need and want. We're just like waiting around for someone else to define what we're going to do. And, we are here to experience the varieties of life so that we can make yes, no decisions, so that we can be discerning in what aligns with our soul assignment and what doesn't. And if you establish those things and you go past them and you break your own promises to yourself, now you're sort of relying on someone else's curriculum to define your own. And that is when we get stuck, right? It's when we get stuck. And that is when we go back to the question I raised before. What parts of myself am I rejecting by staying with someone who continues to reject me? And that's the direction we got to go in, right? Okay. Thank you, everyone. We are at the end of our time for today, but thank you, everyone, for joining me and for sharing your questions, the very deep and thoughtful questions. I so appreciate that. And we will be back at the end of the month for our second live Q&A. For those of you that are my students, the replays are available inside your student dashboard. And again, the link to submit your questions in advance also inside your student dashboard. So please feel free to submit your questions in advance. I try to tackle those first. And if you have any thoughts, reflections, or even questions after we end, please also feel free to type them in the comments of the replay, and we'll try to tackle those as well. Thank you, everyone. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week.